get over 3 billion, which we could offset for the cost of energy prices, so that we could help up to £600 per family.
If we start, as it were, with your shopping list, how much does that cost?
Yeah, well, I'm talking about in the round. So, for example, like I say, the windfall tax on energy and companies, then we could get over £3 billion there. If you look at the national insurance contribution, we said it's regressive in the way that the government...
Keep left to continue on Fags Road.
We could look at other
You are, if I may say so, quite expertly trying to lose my question. My question is, how much does your... Anyway, we've done the sum.
In a quarter of a mile, turn left onto Great Southwest Road, A30.
The best guess of how much the windfall tax would raise, there's lots of debate about it, would be about 1.2 billion. So
well, it's not. It's over 3 billion now. They've had even more money than they thought they were going to get, Andrew.
Even if it's 3, you're still £16 billion short.
Yeah, because you're not also taking into account the situation I said in terms of national insurance contribution hike. We've said that they can look at a more progressive way of doing it. They've not looked at, asset management and trust and funds and how they get there.
You've said on the NI hike, don't do it.
Yeah.
And if they don't do it, then that means the Treasury giving up around £14 billion a year. And that's why at the moment, if I may say so, the sums don't quite add up.
Well, I don't agree with you, Andrew. I think it's the wrong tax hike. There's other ways they can have that money. And, the money that's coming into the Treasury is more than they were expecting at the moment anyway. So actually, with the inflationary rise, they can do things to offset this. This is the wrong tax on the wrong people, when there is more that they can do to... Those that have got the broadest shoulders can pay more to help. So those that have got asset management, they don't pay the tax at the highest rate. So.
Would you like to see, in general terms, a broader shoulders tax? In other words, a tax on people who have the highest incomes and the most wealth.
Well, let's be clear. Boris and Russia have decided they were going to introduce this through a national insurance contribution hike for most working people in this country. I think that's regressive. Labour thinks it's regressive.
Take the second left onto Great Southwest Road, A30.
To hit the working people of this country the hardest.
Okay.
And it's all the choices they could have made.
Beyond the windfall tax, because that's...
Continue on Great Southwest Road for 3/4 of a mile.
Yeah, beyond the windfall tax, how would you pay for more money for the NHS and more money for social care, which is desperately needed?
Sure, and we've said that obviously we're not in government now. We've said that we wouldn't do it through the national insurance contribution hike. That we would do it through looking at other assets and other ways of people within the financial market. Well, we'll set out our tax and spend plans when it comes to the general election. All I'm saying is that Russia has an opportunity tomorrow to decide who's going to pay the most. And at the moment, the working people that have got food price inflation, they've got energy, gas prices going up, they're the ones that are feeling the pinch the most at the moment. And the Chancellor's done nothing.
In a quarter of a mile, take the exit towards Heathrow Airport.
Their energy, but that's it. You can have a loan.
I said earlier on, people are talking about the worst recession in our lifetime, and I was sitting around in the Commons drinking coffee, and lots of people are using that kind of language in private, very rarely in public, but something really, really horrendous may be coming around the corner at us all, particularly...
Take the exit towards Heathrow Airport.
The question is, you'll be asking the government tomorrow, as a party, whether they are doing enough, really, to mitigate that. My question...
In a quarter of a mile, keep left at the fork to continue towards Southern Perimeter Road.
More generous support in the tough times ahead. That's very, very expensive, and you have to give us some sense of how you're going to fund that. Otherwise, it's just words.
And I've said that, and I've said that we wouldn't do it through national insurance contribution. We do it through financial means of those with the broadest shoulders paying more. I've also said how we pay for the energy, but the important thing is, Andrew, and the point that you made, and I will agree with you on this point because I do think it's really important. Because many
keep left at the fork.
Absolutely petrified about how they're going to pay their energy bills. Businesses that have got the hike in energy, they've got the hike in fuel prices. The Chancellor is the Chancellor now. He's there tomorrow. He could fix this. He could do something about it, and he's choosing not to.
Let me try this way. If I put it to you that to fund what needs to be done for lower income families and what's ahead, higher income people and people with...
In a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the second exit and stay on Southern Perimeter Road.
People with accumulated wealth, you've got asset managers who do have more money that don't pay the same level of tax. People who have transactions through their property, they do not pay as much.
Looking at income tax.
So those that are making huge amounts of money and getting richer and richer at the moment, that are not worrying about their energy bill, And yet you've got most people in this country now that are absolutely petrified about what's coming around the corner for them. So a national insurance contribution hike at this moment in time is the wrong way of going about it.
The mood music at the Tory Spring Conference last weekend was very much that there might be a general election next year. Would that not be awful for the Labour Party? You're not ready for it, are you?
No, I'm ready. I mean, I think the country's ready. I mean, Boris Johnson has lied to the people, laughed at the people, and, you know, he's been running around with...
Exit the roundabout onto Southern Perimeter Road.
We need to fix it.
Continue on Southern Perimeter Road for 1.5 miles.
Actually, I think the British public is starting to see what the measure of Boris Johnson is, and they're starting to see the Labour Party has changed. We're not the party that we were in 2019. Myself and Keir took over the leadership of the Labour Party, and we have changed, and we've been showing that change. And I think that we're very much a government in waiting. I think the British public is starting to see. I don't think they're fully sold yet, Andrew. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they've all got the bunting out, but they certainly see what Boris Johnson is, and they're certainly looking at us now and seeing us as different to what Boris Johnson is.
And you relish an election next year if it happens?
Absolutely, because this country needs change, and it needs somebody that's going to look after working people of the country that make Britain what it is.
Angela Rayner, thanks for coming and joining me on the big white banana of news. Been very, very nice talking to you. Coming up, reaction to that interview with the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner. And I'm going to be speaking to Simon Coveney, Minister for Foreign Affairs in the Irish Government. You're listening to Andrew Marr on LBC, and the time is 6:22 and a bit.
LBC. Right now, prices are higher if you're running a car. And very soon, higher at home when you run a bath. So wouldn't it be great to get one or two bills lower? Go Compare's Operation Saving the Nation could help you save money for what you really want. And it starts with a quick comparison of your insurance, broadband, credit cards and more. To win a £2,000 voucher towards whatever you're saving for, thanks to Go Compare, head to lbc.co.uk.
Hold on to your mugs. EE's Full Fiber is here. New broadband that can handle anything. And whatever you think that means, times it by a zillion and dip it in chocolate. Because this broadband connects 100 devices in your home. Search EE Full Fiber.
18.3% UK availability. Check coverage at ee.co.uk.
My prostate cancer was thankfully caught in the nick of time, but it shouldn't be down to luck. Men at higher risk are
aged over 50,
those with a family history of the disease, or black men over 45.
Check your risk of prostate cancer now. Search Risk Checker or visit prostatecanceruk.org. Men, we are with you.
mini eggs, bunch of flour, thing of milk, 5 butter, lots of sugar, some baking powder, a bit of zest, then cherries, jam, cream, splash here, dash there, whip it, oven it, ta-da! Not a cake. A math matter, like how much, how long, and when. Getting business right means getting just the right amount of everything, including insurance. Superscript, monthly business insurance shaped around you.
A squeezing across the chest.
In a 1/4 mile, at Western Perimeter Road roundabout, take the first exit and stay on Southern Perimeter Road.
It's easy to dismiss the early signs of a heart attack, but it's never too early to call 999 and describe your symptoms. Your NHS is here for you.
This is LBC Tonight with Andrew Marr.
The time is 6:24. LBC's Westminster correspondent Ben Kentish joins me now in the studio to talk about that interview with the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner. First of all, now, Angela...
Exit the roundabout onto Southern Perimeter Road.
We're going to have to come up with some tax-raising plans of their own if they're going to have an impact on...
In 200 yards, at the roundabout, take the second exit onto Airport Way, A3113.
Over a week, but there's very little detail, I thought, on exactly how they would replace it.
Broad shoulders.
Broad shoulders, a lot about people with assets, a suggestion of sort of a wealth tax. But as we get closer to an election, and as you touched on, some suggestions that it could be only 18 months or so away, they are going to have to spell out in much more detail exactly how they would fund things like the NHS, because of course it's a very valid question. If you're saying, well, we oppose the government's plan for increasing NHS funding, but we haven't got an alternative, people will say, well, hang on, if you want the NHS to be funded more, how are you going to do it?
I've been gently chewing over Boris Johnson's comments about Labour raising the white flag, etc., because looking at Keir Starmer, on the face of it, it seems absolutely ridiculous. But what I conclude is that Boris Johnson would much prefer to face Jeremy Corbyn again, as he did at the last election, than face Keir Starmer.
Exit the roundabout onto Airport Way.
Constantly talking about the Corbyn era.
Continue on Airport Way for half a mile.
Thinks he's going to create this so-called long Corbyn. And just having a conversation with Angela Rayner about that, I began to wonder whether that might not work quite well.
Andrew, the polls are pretty clear. As I got learned today when people asked why they didn't vote Labour in 2019, 35% said Jeremy Corbyn.
It was more Jeremy Corbyn, if I may say so, than it was Boris Johnson Pro, wasn't it?
Yes, and 19% was the second biggest factor, and that was Brexit.
In a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the 4th exit onto the M25 slip road to M4, M40.
Reasonably good job of distancing himself from Jeremy Corbyn. The damage isn't so much to him, it's to the Labour brand. And it's not just about leadership and strength, it also feeds into issues like national security, and I think voters voiced a lot of concerns about economic credibility. Again, Rachel Reeves, I've spoken to a lot of people around the shadow cabinet, they are aware of the need to change that, but it takes time. And even Angela Rayner saying to you, look, she thinks the British people are now giving Labour a hearing, but she says, look, we're not getting out the bunting just yet. So I think you will hear more as that election edges closer of Boris Johnson reminding the public of what the Labour Party stood for just 2 years or so ago, and the people who supported those positions, namely Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner.
I do think you may be right. Let me ask about tomorrow's spring statement, because we're told, I mean, the clever people who speak to the Financial Times, all the economists, the city people, seem to think that in terms of so-called headroom, which is dosh he didn't realise he had before, is somewhere between 30 and 50 billion pounds, which is a lot. And the big question really is whether he spends all or most of that early on to reduce as much of the pain as possible.
Exit the roundabout onto the slip road.
Just fuel bills are going to be horrendous for a lot of ordinary families, never mind fast rising food bills. I think food is going to be the next thing we end up talking about. It's very, very expensive to remove all of that pain, possibly impossible to remove all of that pain. But does he spend the money now, or does he try and hold back some money for...
Continue for half a mile.
Saying, you know, come the election, he wants to be able to cut taxes, he wants to pose as a tax-cutting chance, or perhaps a tax-cutting Prime Minister by then.
Well, that's certainly part of the thinking, I'm sure, Andrew. The plan was always this. The plan was that we'd have a difficult couple of years. Taxes would go up to the highest level since the 1950s, and then, shortly before an election...
In a quarter of a mile, merge onto M25.
And actually, the Treasury have been very upfront about that being the plan. The thing that could throw a huge spanner in the works to the plan, of course, is the cost of living crisis. I think there's an, talking to people in the government, the Treasury, there's an understanding they can't simply wait another year or 18 months before doing something to help people with the money in their back pocket with the cost of living, because of inflation could hit double figures this year.
Continue on M25 for 1 mile.
Which you're already seeing. So yes, I think there will have to be more. Let's talk of fuel duty cut tomorrow. The big question, of course, is does that stop him from cutting taxes again down the line? If the answer is no, then that plan, the electoral plan, the Tories have drawn up years ago,
Just ain't true. And I mean, I'm talking to MPs who say quite literally in private, and they're not grandstanding, that they know constituents are going to have to choose between heating their houses and feeding their children. I mean, this could be a very, very serious political situation, well, within about 6 months or so.
Absolutely, and that recession that you touched on, I think there is a sense that something potentially very severe is coming down the line. What's interesting is...
In a quarter of a mile, at junction 15, use the left lane to take the M4 exit to Reading, Slough.
wants to borrow or to solve the problem.
Above all, spend.
And spend. And you have a Chancellor who is very, for pragmatic as well as ideological reasons, resistant to that. Now, the fact that the cost of borrowing is also going to...
Use the left lane to exit at junction 15 and keep left at the fork.
An argument that Boris Johnson until now has won more times than not. And that means that...
Keep left at the fork.
When it comes to cutting the £400 billion or so debt that was wrapped up during COVID, and then you might hear the word from Keir Starmer's lips, austerity, and that could become a debate quite reminiscent of where we were 10 years or so ago.
It's going to be very, very bumpy, very, very interesting politics in the weeks and months ahead, and Ben will be here to help us through it. Thanks very much indeed for that. Coming up, I'm going to be joined by Simon Coveney, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, to discuss the EU response to the war in Ukraine. That's the Irish Minister for Foreign Affairs, I should say. You are listening to Andrew Marr and LBC, and Amelia Cox, of course, has the news.
Authorities in Mariupol are calling for Russia to allow 100,000 civilians to escape the city. The city's council claims Moscow is bombing it into the ashes of a dead land following 2 more large attacks. The deputy leader of the Labour Party has told LBC a national insurance increase is a tax on the wrong people at the wrong time. Speaking to Tonight with Andrew Marr, Angela Rayner has suggested Labour would instead look at a wealth tax to increase NHS funding. And the Metropolitan Police says it has a lot of work to do following a damning report by a police watchdog. The Inspectorate of Constabulary found the force's procedures to root out corruption are not fit for purpose. LBC weather dry and largely clear tonight, lows of 3 degrees.
LBC. This is the new way to sell your car from home. This is the Motorway. Motorway's trusted dealers compete to give you the best price, meaning you could get more than you expected for your old car. And once you've found the perfect price, you can sit back and relax. We'll pick your car up from home for free. It really is that simple. Yet
In a quarter of a mile, keep right to stay on M4.
UK. This is the way. This is the Motorway.
Sam, put down that spoon. It's time to go to the movies.
It's 7 a.m.
Popcorn o'clock with the Samsung Galaxy S22 series.
But I've got work.
Does work have a dynamic AMOLED 2X display?
No? What's on?
Keep right to stay on M4.
12 months Disney Plus on us.
Bingy. Get back out there with the epic Samsung Galaxy S22 series. Buy yours at...
Continue on M4 for 4 miles.
Use at £7.99 a month. 18 plus only. Terms apply.
My prostate cancer was thankfully caught in the nick of time, but it shouldn't be down to luck. Men at higher risk are
Aged over 50.
Those with a family history of the disease. Or black men, or the 45.
Check your risk of prostate cancer now. Search Risk Checker or visit prostatecanceruk.org. Men, we are with you.
We're all more or less in the business of adjusting. More record keeping, less device beeping. More troubleshooting, less idle commuting. More network connecting, service perfecting, partner selecting, team directing, payment collecting, and less of the messy rest. Amounts matter, like how much, how long, and when. Getting business right means getting just the right amount of everything, including insurance. Superscript, monthly business insurance shaped around you.
Show someone close to you they're mum of a kind. Order them a beautiful bouquet at zingflowers.com. Amazing every Mother's Day.
This is LBC Tonight with Andrew Marr.
The time is 6:33. Simon Coveney is one of the most experienced and influential figures in Irish politics. He's been Tánaiste or Deputy Prime Minister, and he's now both Minister for Foreign Affairs and Ireland's Defence Minister. He's been absolutely at the centre of discussions in Brussels about how to respond to Putin's invasion, and he joins me now. Simon Coveney, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi Andrew.
Can I ask...
Join you again. I haven't been with you for a while, so it's good to
You have. Nice to see you again, Simon. Can I just ask you first of all about European unity? Because in the first phase of this, the EU's united front was very impressive indeed. But I wonder whether we're just beginning to see the first signs of problems there, as we see countries very dependent on Russian energy, and I'm thinking in particular of Germany, reluctant to turn off the taps for very obvious reasons. Is there beginning to be a bit of separation between some countries who want to go further on sanctions quicker and those who don't?
Well, I mean, I still think there's a remarkable unity within the European Union at the moment. I mean, I've been in politics for, 23 years. I've never seen the kind of resolve that is currently there amongst EU leaders in terms of individual conversations, but also the collective discussion. That doesn't mean we agree on everything.
In 2 miles, at junction 6, take the A355 exit to Slough Central.
How do we increase the pressure on the Kremlin as a deterrent to continuing the war effort? And of course, how do we respond to the extraordinary humanitarian challenge of so far nearly 4 million refugees coming into the EU from Ukraine collectively? And how do we intensify the diplomatic efforts? And how does the EU contribute positively to that, to bringing this madness to an end? So, you know, we had a very long series of meetings yesterday in Brussels of both foreign affairs ministers and defence ministers, actually consecutively. And we have agreed a number of things. So the EU has agreed to effectively double its military assistance to the Ukraine military. That will be finalised tomorrow. And there will be a European summit of EU leaders on Thursday and Friday. And there'll certainly be a discussion as to whether we have a fifth package of sanctions. And you are right. I mean, countries like Ireland are pushing for energy to be part of those sanctions. Oil, gas, coal. The EU spends about
I'm sorry to
euros a year.
I'm sorry to jump in, but you said there'll be discussions about a fifth round of sanctions. Do you think those sanctions will actually happen? Do you think that discussion will come to a conclusion?
I do. What I don't know is what will be in it, and there are different perspectives on this. I mean, if you are planning for up to 10 million Ukrainian refugees to come into the EU because of war and conflict and brutality coming from Russia in Ukraine, and at the same time, that you are spending...
In a quarter of a mile, at junction 6, take the A355 exit to Slough Central.
Which is helping to fund Russia right now in isolation. Well, then that's a conversation that we've got to have, and that conversation is underway. But I think we've also got to be realistic, because unity within the European Union is important, and there are
exit at junction 6.
That are 60, 70, 80% reliant on Russia for their gas and their oil in particular. So this is
in a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the third exit onto Tons Lane, A355.
Has had a long tradition of keeping outside big military alliances by and large, and you're a very, very pro-European nation as well. If Europe goes ahead to try to create what's being called the European defence pillar of NATO, would Ireland be part of that? In other words, can you see a change in Ireland's attitude to collective defence, military spending and collective defence as a result of this war?
Well, there is a difference between European defence and security and NATO. So don't forget that there are 6 EU member states that are not in NATO.
Indeed. But people are talking about it becoming part of NATO.
Yes, they are, particularly Finland. But certainly what Ireland is part of now, and we agreed what's called the strategic compass, which is a very sort of European technical name for the European security.
Exit the roundabout onto Tons Lane.
We agreed that yesterday as foreign ministers and defence ministers, and that will involve Ireland and other military...
In a quarter of a mile, slight left towards Sippenham Lane.
...towards EU security defence.
Will you have to change your constitution, do you think?
No, and I think that policy has been designed and written to ensure that that's not the case, because I think that would delay things. So this is effectively about Ireland voluntarily being part of a collective response to security and defence issues, being sure that we train with other countries, that we're interoperable, as we are, by the way, with many NATO countries.
Slight left towards Sippenham Lane.
Missions and peace training missions and intervention missions that Ireland is involved in.
Simon, you're also, of course, Defence Minister for the Irish Republic. Can I ask you...
Continue for 1.5 miles.
...that President Biden has put on the agenda today, which is that given that Russia's war machine is in trouble, it's not impossible that Putin starts to use biological, chemical, or even, God forbid, tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. And the great dilemma, which I put to you now, is what does the EU, what does NATO do in response?
I think that's an extraordinarily difficult question to answer, and I wouldn't dare give an answer for NATO, because Ireland isn't part of NATO, even though I speak to NATO ministers virtually every day. But I do think that first of all, there's a reason why President Biden is warning against this and is very public about it, so that disinformation coming from Russia can't in any way manage a military tactic of using chemical weapons illegally, but in some way blaming Ukrainians for that. And I think that is a very deliberate communication strategy coming from the US, which, by the way, we've seen for the last month in terms of warning what Russia were likely to do militarily. Unfortunately, lots of people didn't listen to those US warnings. Most countries in the EU, and indeed Ukraine itself, I think believed that Russia would invade the eastern parts of Ukraine into the Donbass, but they didn't expect an all-out invasion, which is what has subsequently happened. So, I think it's quite evident now that Russia has made some very serious miscalculations, both militarily, politically, and economically, in relation to war. And of course, the fear is that the frustration in Moscow at the lack of military success and advance in Ukraine will result in more extreme measures. And of course, the big fear is that more dramatic weapons, if you want to call them that, will be used, and of course that would be an extraordinary
it would be absolutely hellish, but there is no understanding yet what our response might be, which is really what I was asking.
I don't think so, because if you ask the US President that question, or if you ask the British Prime Minister that question, or if you ask any of the EU leaders that question, they will say that we don't want to escalate this war outside of Ukraine to become a global war. And I think that is the judgment for now. But who knows where that conversation will go if we see chemical weapons being used on innocent civilians in Ukraine. I think the moral pressure on the world to respond to that, I think, would be enormous.
Let me turn to a frankly lesser question, if I may. We've had a bit of controversy in this country after Boris Johnson's comments at the weekend, apparently equating Brexit with Ukraine's repulsion of the invasion. I wonder what you thought when you heard those comments.
Well, look, all I can say is that the Prime Minister has apologised for those comments. He said sorry, and I think that says an awful lot.
I'm not sure he has.
Well, certainly the headlines that we've seen is that he's said sorry. I mean, look, it was not a good comparison on any level to compare a war that unfortunately is devastating the heart of Europe with a choice of the British people democratically to leave the European Union. These are not two things that should be in the same sentence.
It clearly went down badly with lots of heads of government in the EU. Boris Johnson has not been invited to the big summit with President Biden there as well. Is that in any way related to his comments, or is that always going to be the case?
I'm not sure. I mean, I wouldn't read too much into that. I mean, I've read some of the British media comment in relation to that today. In truth, there have been lots of meetings where Boris Johnson has very much been there with EU leaders, with the US President, and there have been other meetings where he hasn't. And it's been the same for the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss. I mean, we've had multiple meetings as EU foreign ministers with Anthony Blinken. Some of those meetings involved Liz Truss and our Canadian colleague as well. Some of those meetings have just been between the US and the EU. And this is a summit where EU leaders are focusing on transatlantic relations with President Biden. And I don't think we should read too much into that.
Simon, you mentioned Liz Truss a moment ago.